Good morning, everyone. We are Pod M, and Pod M includes myself, Myra Humphreys, Anne Marie Hogan, Arlette Cepeda, Arthur Larson, and Abigail Tisbury. And I just have to say that our pod, really no one knew each other, and we have just become just friends in such an important and valuable way, not only to the work that we've been doing, but in supporting each other in the work that we're doing in our different spaces. And it has been just a real honor and a pleasure to discover new friendships through this work that I know will continue on. So Pod M really rocks. I want to tell you a little bit more about our Pod M. Together, we have a combined 60 years of living and working on Staten Island. And together, we hold many identities. Together, we are descendants of immigrants, caregivers of children with LGBTQ+ identities. We are members of Jewish synagogues, people of color, second language learners, and families with loved ones who have a disability. And although these identities don't speak to the entirety of who we are, these are the identities that have often shaped our experiences with exclusion. And together, we, Jenna, you can turn to the next slide. Thanks. Oh, the other one. Yep, thanks. So together we have discovered that we hold distinct as well as common stories that make this project both personally and socially significant to us, our loved ones, and our Staten Island community. But we know that not only do our stories matter, but your stories matter too. And that the stories of every community member on Staten Island has value and worth. And so the value of stories is also what has inspired our project proposal. Our pod has looked at the Equity and Belonging Survey of Residents, and although the survey is not complete, we specifically were interested in looking at coding a question on belonging. And so our pod learned how to code and recode the responses of 520 participants who answered the following question. Think of a place in Staten Island where you feel or have felt a sense of belonging, a place where you thought to yourself, I belong here. This is my community, or this is where I feel most at home. Please describe that place. So thinking of this question, we wanted to explore these stories of belonging. We wanted to ask people about their experiences with belonging because, you know, we've identified earlier the barriers to equity and belonging, and these barriers are significant and they're complex. Yet affirmative exploration of opportunities for belonging are often relatively unknown. And often we think of the problems that create unbelonging and create barriers to belonging, but we don't think about what's happening that is working. And so as humans, we tell stories about our reality, but we also tell stories to change that reality. And so we decided to highlight affirmative stories of belonging because positive stories have the capacity to change reality by revealing direct and multifaceted insights into how systems work, institutions, and structures might advance belonging through listening to people's stories. What is working? And so that's what brings us to our question that frames our project. So understanding that Staten Island residents who identify as people with disabilities, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color immigrants, people living in socioeconomic insecurity, and the LGBTQ plus community often experience barriers to belonging on Staten Island. Our project seeks to answer the question, what will it take to build a bigger we? You can move to the next slide. Thank you, Jenna. So what will it take to build a better we? And we all belong, so we took our question and we thought about how could we answer our question. And we can move to the next slide. So so we are proposing that our project, We All Belong Here on Staten Island, is a project that looks to build a bigger we by raising awareness of the experiences that shape connectedness and belonging on Staten Island, and also helping people to broaden their application of sharing pivotal experiences across the island. Number two, to influence residents, community groups, and organizations and policymakers to examine who is not connected in Staten Island. And lastly, to cultivate sustainable supports for individual, organizational, and institutions to expand belonging to people with stigmatized identities that are experiencing barriers to belonging on Staten Island. And so these are the goals for our project, and we like to lovingly call it WABHOSI. So this is the WABHOSI project. And Anne is going to share with you about the different phases of the project.
I think me, Myra, not Anne. Just kidding.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I was like, wait, maybe she's here.
So we have a lot of A's. Arthur. Thank you.
So yeah, it's a two-part sort of initiative based on the stories we already read and people's experiences of belonging on Staten Island and how that really broke down to neighborhoods and individual places, community centers like the JCC or the Pride Center, restaurants. I mean, it was such a broad gamut of places where people were able to identify their belonging and what that meant. So the campaign would really be to encourage more of that storytelling, to really tell us what creates belonging for you. And when those places are identified, they would be given a certificate, both virtually and in person, because the world has to be adaptable these days. And with that certificate would also become part of a toolkit that we would be giving out that would be identifying how to figure out what belonging means for you in the personal sense, then what community belonging resources exist, and then what Staten Island-wide, citywide, macro level resources exist to create belonging too. So working with agencies like the Pride Center, like the JCC, to identify what communities, different communities need to create that belonging, right? Because those individual groups are already doing that work. I know the Pride Center goes out and does those workshops, and other agencies do those workshops, but there's not a central toolkit that says, here's what belonging looks like on Staten Island in a way that's intersectional. And I think intersectionality became a very big overarching theme on how we want to approach this. So we believe those things combined would create belonging, equity, and diversity on Staten Island. You can go to the next slide. So right, the campaign piece of this, like I said, we want to celebrate the spaces and people that create belonging on Staten Island. We want to create accountability and use positive social pressure, because so often when we think about peer pressure or social pressure, it's a negative thing. We want to celebrate. We want people to be proud of the fact that they're being lauded as a safe space or a brave space on this island. So using community mapping stories of belonging through a Google Maps website, Staten Island residents would nominate people and places that are expanding belonging to historically stigmatized communities and neighborhoods.
I think, Myra, you're on mute. And just an FYI, we have about like 30 seconds left to wrap this pod presentation up. I think you're still on mute, Myra.
Can we get like a minute?
Sure, go for it. I know everyone wants to hear the wrap up.
So we have is it possible that we can click on the link? Can we get the link up? Let me see if I can get the link up for the. So what we've done is we've created a prototype for the equity and belonging app that we are considering. Okay, and Jenna will hopefully be able to post it up there. So part of the project is that we analyzed data from the Equity and Belonging Survey, and we noticed that 16% of participants said that their belonging happened in outdoor spaces, 12% in the North Shore neighborhoods, and 13% in schools. And so part of this project would be to look at where are the spaces of belonging, and also have people add to those spaces of belonging through an app, through local communities, having sign-up sheets where people can write their stories of belonging, inviting people and residents to take a pledge of belonging, and using this prototype of online story mapping to highlight where are the stories of belonging on the island and how can we expand that. So if we move to the next slide. Jenna, maybe you can put the link in the chat and people can just take a look at it for themselves.
Of the GIS or the slides?
Of the mapping. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's in the chat.
So the second part of that project would be that we want to acknowledge the spaces with certificates, right? So once people have identified through the app, through local agencies that are conducting storytelling sessions about where people are belonging, we want to then give certificates that acknowledge spaces of belonging that are expanding their belonging across to historically stigmatized populations, and tell those stories and have beautifully painted artistic certificates that would be all around Staten Island, acknowledging those spaces. I think you can go to the one before that is the certificates. It's the slide before that, Jenna. Yeah, so this is what it could look like. This is an example of what happened in San Francisco, where they did certificates of belonging on Staten Island, in San Francisco, and this is what we're looking to do across the island. And then we're just going to end with Arlette sharing with you how using this affirmative process to then help organizations to see if they don't see themselves in it, if communities don't see themselves on the mapping and in the certificates, well, here's a toolkit, here are resources so that you can figure out how to get on the map. And so Arlette's going to talk a little bit about that resource kit.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Arlette Cepeda. I'm the Deputy Director at La Colmena. I'm part of the Emerald Pod. Really proud. Woo! I'm talking about the micro solutions, meso solutions that we came up as part of our resource kit. This is a people-centered approach where relationship stories and identities are at the center of the strategy, as opposed to patterns, process, and structures. This is important because usually the status quo is that we work the other way around. We are flipping the narrative where people are what's important. The point is that we have identified that there is plenty of people on Staten Island already doing this inclusive work, and we are bringing these people together as part of a network. Around that, we are thinking that if we have a coalition that is intersectional, that will allow people to have resources to replicate this in their businesses and organizations, and even at the individual basis, you can take actions to be more inclusive, the type of language that you use, the acknowledgements that you make, and making people and organizations that you support accountable for that as well. Again, supporting organizations that foster belonging and inclusion is an action that people can take at the micro and meso level, but at the macro level, we're thinking about providing tools of best practices of equity and belonging where institutions can review their policies and make changes that address equity and inclusion, and what we call it kind of like an affirmative action for belonging. And at the legislative pieces, we're talking about changing laws like housing zones, zoning laws, and where people can do advocacy with their local politics. And lastly, the whole WABHOSI project is people-centered. We're trying to change the narrative by celebrating what's already happening. We are trying to include, be intersectional, include nonprofits, schools, small businesses, and we will need technology expertise because we are trying to make this available through apps and websites, and of course funding to have a coordinator to support the toolkit and the resources that we want to give to the network. Hope you like our presentation.